Welcome. We've all been there. You're in a conversation, maybe even a debate, and you've got all the facts, all the data, rock-solid proof, and it just does nothing. The person you're talking to just won't budge. So today's explainer is all about tackling that exact frustration. Why, even when you show them the truth, do people so often refuse to change their minds?
All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to start by looking at the problem itself, then dig into the standard psychological reasons people give. After that, we'll get to the really interesting part, where our source material suggests a much deeper cause, looking at it from both a cognitive and even a theological angle, before we wrap up with what it all means for us.
Okay, let's dive right in. First, we need to really get a handle on the problem. We're calling it the unmovable mind. That frustrating reality we all know so well when it comes to facts versus beliefs.
And this really is the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's not like we're short on information these days. The issue is that stubborn, sometimes infuriating gap between clear, hard evidence and what someone chooses to believe.
I love this analogy the source material uses. It says, facts often bounce off our beliefs like stones skipped across a frozen lake. They just kind of skate right across the surface, but never actually break through to what's underneath. It's such a perfect image for that feeling.
So, what's going on here? Well, psychology actually offers a pretty standard framework with 4 common reasons, and that brings us to our second section.
Psychologists often use what they call the 4-layer framework to unpack this whole thing. You can think of it as looking at the problem from 4 different angles: how our brains are built to think, what our brain chemistry is doing, our deep-seated social needs, and of course, the power of our emotions.
So, let's quickly break this down. Cognitively, you've got mental shortcuts like confirmation bias, which basically makes us seek out info that we already agree with. Neurobiologically, our brains literally give us a little hit of dopamine, a reward when we defend our beliefs. Socially, our beliefs are kind of like jerseys for our favorite team. They signal who our tribe is. And emotionally, well, our gut feelings usually get there first, and then our logical brain scrambles to come up with reasons to back them up.
Now, those 4 reasons, they make a lot of sense, right? But this is where our source material takes a really fascinating turn. It asks us to kind of step back and diagnose the diagnosis itself. What if we're missing the real cause?
And this is the big question, the pivot point of the whole argument. What if all those things, our biases, our brain chemistry, our tribal instincts, our emotions, what if they aren't the actual disease? What if they're just the symptoms of something way, way deeper? You see, here's the crucial point. Saying someone has confirmation bias just describes what's happening. It doesn't explain why our brains are designed with that bias in the first place. These standard explanations are great at diagnosing the what, but they completely miss the fundamental why.
And that brings us right to the core thesis of the source material. Section 4, the belief maintenance system. This is supposedly our mind's true core directive.
Okay, so the source proposes this really powerful idea. It suggests that our minds did not evolve to be perfect little truth-detecting machines. Nope. Instead, their number one job, their core function, is to maintain and protect the beliefs we already have, because for most of human history, that stability was key to survival.
Yeah, this slide just lays it out so clearly. Our mind's design isn't a truth detection engine. It's a belief maintenance system. Its primary job is not discovery, it's defense. The goal is to keep our worldview stable, not to constantly have to rebuild it from scratch with every new piece of info.
And here is the truly mind-blowing part of this idea. Fact resistance, confirmation bias, all those things we see as glitches or bugs in our thinking, they aren't bugs at all. According to this theory, they are the system's core feature. They were efficient shortcuts that helped us make fast decisions and stay alive in a very chaotic world.
Okay, so we have this really compelling cognitive framework, but the source doesn't stop there. It then connects this idea to a specific theological interpretation. So let's explore that in Section 5, a divine design.
So from the Christian perspective presented in the source, truth isn't just a collection of facts or a database of information. The source points to Scripture, where truth is defined as something ultimate and personal, the actual essence of God, embodied in the person of Christ. It's a who, not a what.
So the argument here is that our minds were built this way on purpose. Think about it. If we were perfect truth seekers who could figure everything out on our own, what would we need God for? Our built-in limitations, this belief maintenance system, are actually there to point us toward humility and encourage us to rely on something bigger than ourselves. The source even connects this all the way back to the Garden of Eden. The serpent's temptation to be like God is seen as the original desire for independent, self-sufficient knowledge, basically wanting to have our own truth detection engine instead of relying on a relationship with the source of truth. And what's so wild is how Scripture itself seems to acknowledge this cognitive default of ours. A verse like this is pretty much a direct instruction to override our built-in belief maintenance system. It's telling us to trust in divine revelation rather than our own limited, self-preserving minds.
Okay, so if our brains are basically hardwired for resistance, how does anyone ever change their mind? How is that even possible? Well, that brings us to our final section, which is all about the path from resistance to revelation.
Here's the big idea. The source argues that this internal resistance, this cognitive friction, is exactly what makes us human. If our beliefs just changed automatically with every new fact, we'd be nothing more than robots. This friction is what creates the space for a meaningful choice. The choice to change, the choice to believe, the choice to have faith.
And this isn't just abstract theory. It has huge real-world implications. It suggests that if you want to change someone's mind, a better argument is often not enough. You need a relationship. It means that personal growth is a long process of renewing the mind, not just learning new facts. And it absolutely demands that we have some humility about our own biases. It suggests that really deep, transformative change often comes from a powerful experience, not just a smarter debate opponent.
So in the end, the source completely reframes the whole problem. That stubborn, fact-resistant part of our brain that frustrates us so much, maybe it's not a flaw. From this perspective, it's actually a divine invitation. A feature designed to push us away from total self-reliance and nudge us towards surrendering to a truth that's bigger than ourselves.
And that leaves us with one last really big question to chew on. It takes this whole discussion from being a neat psychological puzzle and turns it into a deeply personal journey. If our minds are fundamentally designed to protect what we already believe, then what does it truly take for any of us to find truth?